Tolo, your host, and welcome to the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. We're here to empower you to lead yourself and others with emotional intelligence. Let's go. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Tolo. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. I'm really looking forward to recording with you. So would you mind introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yes, Lavar Thomas, originally from Brooklyn, New York. Currently serving as co-founder of Leaders of the Free World. It's an international experience and leadership development program for young Black men. I'm also an environmental justice coordinator with the federal government. So excited to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So tell me a bit about Leaders of the Free World. Where did that start from?
Yes, so LFW started out of my Peace Corps service. So I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer, served in the Peace Corps in Rwanda, East Africa from 2014 to 2016. And I was a community health volunteer working on issues from malaria prevention to HIV prevention to even different aspects of food security and youth development as well, because there was a large orphan population in my community as a result of the genocide. But just growing up in New York City and living in a rural community in Rwanda was just not only culture shock, but it was also life-changing for me to have to learn the local language, Kinyarwanda, to be able to interact, to navigate. And it changed my life. But one of the things that I realized was that I was probably one of two Black men in the Peace Corps overall.
Wow.
And I knew, coming from Brooklyn, New York, there were a lot of other brothers like myself that would probably never have the opportunity to just up and leave their jobs and live abroad for 2 years. So I really wanted to find a way to at least plant the seeds of international experience and what it can do when it comes to not only helping these young Black men understand who they are, but who they can become, right? So sometimes our environments just trap us into believing that all we can become is all we see in our immediate environment. And growing up in my community where there was, crime and poverty and gun violence and incarceration and just so many things like of that nature, sometimes that's if that's all you know, then you feel like that's all the narrative is to the story. So for me, international experiences expanded that story for me in a way that allowed me to see myself beyond the narratives of my community, but seeing myself as a global citizen. So LFW is really helping me to take my international experiences and make it accessible to others so they can see that their neighborhood and their world is bigger than their backyard and who they can become in the process.
I love that. And what made you want to go to the Peace Corps? Because that's quite a big step, right? So where did that idea come from for you?
Yeah, so honestly, before college, I had no idea what the Peace Corps even was about. I remember it was my last semester at college at Clark University. And at that point, I was still trying to decide whether to work a job or if I'm going to go to grad school, that last year of college where life gets real
Yeah.
for you as you start to think about what's that next step.
Yeah.
And I remember speaking to one of my advisors, and who did the Peace Corps in Jordan. And she was telling me about her experience of, being in a similar situation when she was in college and how folks were telling her, you should either work or go to grad school. And she wanted to break away from all of the noise and the buzz. So she decided to join the Peace Corps teaching English in Jordan and ended up becoming fluent in Arabic, falling in love with Middle Eastern politics. And that's what drove her to go to grad school and study Middle Eastern politics and pursue her PhD. And now she's teaching at my university. So it's like, I thought that was a really cool journey for her to find her purpose, for her to find her interest. And I'm like, I want to do that. I want to take the path of that no one has taken, that I didn't know anyone who's journeyed on, and to figure out what is my purpose, what is my voice, what is the impact that I want to have in the world, and taking that rite of passage for myself. When I read The Alchemist for the first time by Paulo Coelho, the journey that the kind of the character in the story went to go to Egypt, to find this this thing that he's in search of, but in the
mm,
process, the person that he becomes in the process
mm,
was probably more important than the destination.
mm,
So for me, it was like the person I know that I could become as a result of this experience was way more important, way, supersedes me just living abroad for 2 years. So yeah, that for me, I can't say it was a no-brainer because it was hard
mm.
thinking, walking away from my salary to make like $200 a month as a volunteer,
Wow.
right? But I knew that, a job would always be there, right?
Yes.
9 to 5 will always
Yeah.
be there. Graduate school will always be there.
Mm,
Student loans will always be there. But how
yeah.
often can I say I will have this opportunity to live abroad in East Africa for 2 years,
Mm,
be immersed in the culture.
mm.
So that helped me to, you know, step out on the fear that I was experiencing and take advantage of it.
And you mentioned it was quite hard. What was one of the hardest things that you found in adjusting to life in the Peace Corps?
I think, well, for one, just the culture shock, um, and the reality of just being a person of color in a white organization, being a minority and dealing with what does it mean to be a Black American in an East African country
Mm,
and navigating identity. When people see me, they're
mm.
like, "Are you Rwandese? You have to be Rwandese." And I'm like, "Nah, my family was born in South America, in Guyana. I was born in Brooklyn. It's like, no, someone must be
Yeah, yeah.
someone must be from Rwanda." And I'm like, no. So I think the challenge of identity, right?
Mm,
Because for me as a Black American, I think that's one of the things that we're all constantly searching for in terms of the diasporic navigation. Is like,
mm,
where are we from?
mm,
We understand the transatlantic slave trade and what that's done to culture and identity.
mm,
So for me, being in Rwanda was like, as much as the world understands what took place in the slave trade, now they're being confronted by the reality of this process, of this system that took place. So now I
mm.
represent a system or process that that looks similar to them, but it's completely
It's not
different
quite
in
the
terms of
same. Yeah,
culture. And so it's like,
yeah.
yeah. So it's like, you look like me, but you speak English like the white man, or you look like me, or but you don't know any Kinyarwanda, you
Mm,
know.
mm,
And that was hard to reconcile. So I think navigating that on top of just the rural public health challenges and adjusting to a new environment and trying to establish trust
mm,
and trying to make a difference were a number of compounded challenges, I think, being a volunteer.
mm. And what were some of the things that you learned about leadership from being in the Peace Corps?
Yeah, I think for one that leadership isn't about you.
Mm,
I think it's so easy to get caught up in the idea of the the optics of leadership, the
yeah.
title, the prestige, everything that comes with it.
Mm,
But when you're trying to create impact on a
mm,
local level,
mm,
it's really your ability to unify people towards a vision, and not your own vision, but their vision of where they want to go, and
mm,
facilitating that process. So for me, I had to learn as a leader how to overcome the ego that I came with of feeling like that I had all the answers,
mm,
and realize that I didn't have the answers. And but collectively we can identify the answers together, and using my understanding, using my resources, using my privilege as an American to support them in their process of addressing malnutrition or addressing
mm,
socioeconomic challenges or addressing the educational disparities that's in the community or the resource gaps. It's it's me helping to bring out the best in others. I think that's what true leadership is about, right?
yeah.
Helping to maximize the potential of other people, and not to duplicate Lavar, but to help them to really maximize who they are and their capacity and their strengths to be able to help others do the same. So it's like lighting
Mm,
that candle
mm.
and helping them to light other candles as they continue to journey and to grow and to have impact. So to me, that's what leadership is about.
And is that something that they teach you a bit about in the Peace Corps about, when you're going over there, like not having that hero complex. Because I think sometimes, even from England, when we go to other nations and things like that, sometimes we can have a bit of that hero complex. So is that something that they talked to you about in the Peace Corps in terms of how you're going over there?
Yeah, I think, to some extent, you learn about cultural competency, you learn about kind of just the reality of serving abroad and the challenges and what the Peace Corps is about and the goal of the Peace Corps. But I also think there's that training and then there's the actual training
Reality, yeah,
of
yeah.
of,
Yeah,
of you
real life
being
training.
in your yeah, because
Yeah.
you know, for the first 3 months, you're with your cohort, you're learning the
Mm,
language, you're going through these cross-cultural experience trainings, you're staying with the host family. And then after the 3 months, you have to take like a language assessment, and then you swear in as a volunteer. And that's once you're sworn in, then you're placed at your site, and that's when the service actually starts. So they drop you
mm.
off in your community at your house, and they're like,
See ya.
for 2 years,
See ya. Yeah.
you got
Wow.
you got to figure it out. And of course, there's meetings throughout the service and things like that and
Mm,
trainings, but I think that's when it really starts, and that's when the romanticism of being on the continent starts to fade,
mm,
and you realize they're like, okay, this is my life, and now I have to figure out what am I going to do, who I'm going to make connections with,
mm,
you know, how do I want my service to look,
mm,
and a lot of that changes, of course, but I think the training that you get on the ground, you start to learn, oh, I shouldn't say that, or this is how I need to navigate these spaces, and like
mm.
that's where the real lived experience teaches you things
Mhm, mhm,
beyond just like the traditional training. This is what you're going to be
mm,
learning, and this is what's going to happen. It's like there's that training, and then there's like the lived, real, hard
yeah.
knocks life training that you're going to get on the ground.
Mm, mm. And so, where do you feel like emotional intelligence plays into all of this?
Ah, emotional intelligence is has been key for me in terms of developing the self awareness
Mm,
of who I am, understanding my own emotions, putting words to it. I think, and particularly in the U.S. and particularly Caribbean culture, I think that this idea of being in tune with your emotions has had a stigma, or it's
mm,
been feminized, when
mm,
it comes to black male expression. So I had to learn how to be okay with crying, right? Be okay with feeling emotions, be okay with articulating how I feel and communicating how I feel,
mm,
because we're human, right? So it's helped in the journey of leadership in the standpoint of, communicating when I've reached my limits,
mm,
being able to recognize when I need help,
mm,
being able to, know when to stop and take a step back because I'm overwhelmed. Or, you know, after losing my dad in 2018, trying to think about what this new normal going forward will look like.
mm,
When do I need to say no to opportunities, or I need to like resign from things because I'm not able to show up?
mm,
Recognizing that I need therapy, recognizing
mm,
that I should be praying more, or getting more in tune with my spirituality. It's like
mm,
emotional intelligence provides the compass
mm.
for navigating through leadership, for navigating through life. So for me, it's important and it's essential. Like I don't think you can be an effective leader without emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'm interested in, where did your journey with emotional intelligence start? Like, how did you start to realize that this was something that was important for you? Was it when you were younger, or where did that really start for you?
I remember in high school when I had got rejected from all the colleges that I had applied to because I did terrible on my SATs. I, rem- I, rem- I remember that feeling
Mm,
of defeat,
mm,
feeling like, it was like, it felt like the end of the world at that time of like, what is my life going to be?
mm,
Because I think there was the expectation for everyone, like, okay, everyone's going to college. But now I'm in this situation where, I kind of felt like I was failed by this system. that was been constructed that I didn't quite know how to navigate. And I remember the feeling of having my back against the wall
Mm.
and not liking how that felt,
Mm.
right? And even if when I think back to that time, I'm like, I hated that feeling of rejection. I hated the feeling of not having any options. I hated the feeling of not feeling like I was able to succeed at something. So those emotions stuck with me
Mm.
over my journey in terms of helping me to kind of further develop my own self-concept in terms of leadership and what
Mm.
does it mean to be a leader, and reconciling this false narrative I had around failure and what does failure mean, and rejection,
Mm.
and these things. So the emotional intelligence, I think, came later down the line, because you experience these things when you're younger, but you don't know what they mean. You just feel what you feel.
Mm.
But I realized that how I felt was connected to a narrative later down the line,
Mm.
right? This feeling of rejection, this feeling of the need for external validation, this feeling that I needed to constantly have to prove myself given the environments that I came out of or where I grew up. All of those things, you know, I later learned that it was tied to a narrative that I was telling myself, a narrative that I felt
Mm.
like I wasn't good enough, or a narrative that I
Mm.
felt like, could anything come out of Brownsville, Brooklyn? A narrative of when people
Yeah.
see me and they,
Yeah. Yeah.
they see me and they respond a certain way. It's like, why am I a threat? And why does the media paint me as a threat?
Mm.
So
Mm.
there's all of these ideas that played into kind of the emotional psyche and what I was feeling. And so I would say, the emotional intelligence journey started, a long time ago when I was growing up. But I think understanding and putting words to the emotions and
Mm.
understanding the narrative that came with those emotions,
Mm.
I think came later down the line as I matured. And I did therapy, and I was able in mentorship, and I was able to
Mm.
start putting language around how I was feeling.
Mm.
I think then it gave power to the emotions that I felt, right?
Mm.
And how I could rewrite the emotions that I was experiencing by shifting the language that I was using.
Mm.
So, yeah, I would say it
Mm.
started years ago.
That makes sense. That makes sense. One of the things that you mentioned was about therapy. How did you end up going into therapy?
So, the first therapy session that I've been to was right after my Peace Corps service. So they give you, as you transition back, they give you these vouchers to go to therapy for like healthcare, for all these different
Yeah.
things. So that was the first time I started going to therapy, because in the last 6 months of my Peace Corps service, my grandfather passed away.
Oh.
And he was one of my biggest supporters, one of my biggest mentors. He passed in February and my service ended in July. So when I came back, it was really trying to figure out what my life was going to be
Mm.
going forward. And the
Mm.
crazy thing is, I wasn't even planning on coming back. I was planning on extending my service to work with an organization in Rwanda for a third year.
Mm.
But after he passed, I decided to come back home. And, you know, it's hard so anytime like you live somewhere 2 years or more, you adjust to the culture, you adjust to the life there, you adjust to the
Mm.
language. So one of the requirements that the Peace Corps has, a part of that process, that they require you to go back to the US for at least a month. Because if you're staying somewhere long enough, you begin to adapt, and then there's the reverse culture shock
Mm. Mm.
that happens
Yeah.
after living in some place. So so when I came back to visit, I remember going into, it was a BJ's or a Costco, and I was so overwhelmed.
Mm.
Like everything was happening so fast.
Yeah.
I was lost.
Yeah.
I started to freak out, and I ran out and ran back to the car. It just sat in the
Wow.
car until my
Yeah.
family came out. And I'm like, wow, this is really a
It's a
thing.
real
Like
thing.
this
Yeah.
reverse culture shock. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm from New York. I can adjust. It's easy. I'll get back home and it'll be smooth sailing. And it was a struggle.
Mm.
It was such a struggle. And then I thought, I did the Peace Corps. I had this dope experience. These
Yeah.
jobs are going to be lined up in front of me. Like, yeah, we want to hire you, Lavar. And it was like crickets for like the first 3 months. I was struggling. I applied to a job,
Mm.
nothing, hear nothing back. Applied to another job. You get the first round of interviews and then they don't hear nothing back. Or you get to the second round and like, oh, we went with another
Mm.
candidate. So it was like a struggle from readjusting to trying to figure out jobs and life.
Mm.
So therapy was the first step
Mm.
for me, to like just introduce myself to like what does talking through these emotions look like, feel like.
Mm.
And it was uncomfortable. I think it was hard feeling like I'm talking to a stranger and not knowing who this person is and they're asking these like strange questions
Mm.
and I'm trying to open up, but it was a muscle that I had to grow,
Mm. Mm.
and the more you do it, the more the muscle gets stronger. So yeah, I think that was the first introduction to therapy for me.
How long did it take you to get comfortable in therapy?
I think when I found like so after that initial therapy, I think that therapy session, like therapy interaction was like you get like 6 sessions or something like that.
Mhm.
So when I started working with the EPA, they had like the federal like the employee association, and I went to a therapist through there, and I'm like, he spoke more than I did, so I'm like, okay, this is not it. This is not gonna be the one.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's 30 minutes, and you've done more talking than I have. Like, this is a
Yeah.
problem. But then one of my coworkers told me about a therapist that she knew that was Christian, that was really good.
Mm.
And at this point, this is 2018. My dad had recently passed, so I was really looking to connect with somebody. Ended up working with them for 2 years,
Mm.
so that was helpful, to just be able to one connect with the person,
Mm.
identify with the background, and you know just trusting the process.
Mm.
So at that point, that's when I realized that okay, this is really helpful to
Mm.
to have a space where I can talk through things that I'm not able to talk through with everyone or
Mm.
anyone, and just having a space where I can just focus on my own mental and work through things that's bothering me.
Mm.
And it's helped me. It's helped me tremendously.
It's such an amazing thing to be able to do that and to be able to really just understand yourself better.
Absolutely.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier was about mentors that you had and how that's helped you along your journey. So what are some of the things that you've learned from being mentored in terms of leadership?
Yeah, I think one of the things one of my mentors told me years ago, he was like, LeVar, once you believe in the worth and the value that you have,
Mm.
your life will shift. So
Mm.
like, if you can believe in what I see in you,
Mm.
if you can believe,
Mm.
then things will shift. And that stuck with me till this point because, you know, sometimes we complain about our lives and not feeling as if we're enough.
Mm.
And if someone else could take the same cards that you've been dealt with and
Mm.
win in life,
Mm.
what does that say about how you are showing up with the cards that you have?
Mm.
Right.
Mm.
So for me, it was like, you got to believe in your worth. Like, isn't it crazy that so many people can see the potential and the value that you bring, but you can't see it yourself?
You can't. Yeah.
And they're not in your life, and they're not driving the vehicle that you have.
Mm.
So it comes a point for me where I had to get away from what other people thought about what Lavar can be and do, and what does God say about who Lavar is,
Mm.
and being on that spiritual journey of understanding who God is, but who He created me to be if I'm created in His image,
Mm.
and the potential that I have, and getting away from the opinions of others and what is the truth
Mm.
that God has created me in. And it's changed my self-concept drastically to
Mm.
understand the value that I have, and that no tests, no job, no title can add to the value that I was already created with,
Mm.
right? It doesn't define me. It can add and complement the value, but it doesn't determine the value.
Mm.
And I think that was the mental shift that has transformed my leadership, um, and the impact that I've been able to have.
So how would you say that that's changed your leadership? So you said it's transformed it. So what are some of the tangible things that you see differently in terms of how you lead now versus how you led before?
I think no longer leading from a place of validation seeking,
Mm. Mm.
people pleasing, um, not, you know, not feeling like I need to be perfect or have all the answers to take action,
Mm.
to move forward.
Mm.
Um, it's allowed me to bloom where I'm planted,
Mm.
to be able to just maximize who I am and where I am at every phase of my life, at every step of the process. So no matter where I'm at, I can have an impact. I can
Mm.
add value. I can create some kind of change just
Mm.
based on who I am at that time in that season. And it's and not feeling like you like I need like I need to have this stamp of approval to lead. Right?
Mm.
Sometimes we're waiting for someone to tap you and say, Tolu, you are now a leader. Now go lead. Like you can tell yourself that, right?
Yeah.
And taking your passions and your interests and solving problems.
Mm.
Um, I think that's the biggest thing. Like I've learned that leadership is truly about solving problems, helping people to solve problems, and adding
Mm.
value.
Mm.
And the more you do that, the more people gravitate towards you. The more people want to
Mm.
follow you. The more people want
Mm.
to support the work that you're doing,
Mm.
because that's what's attractive as a leader, right?
Mm.
Like again, like you know, traditional leadership theory is like, okay, you got leaders, you got followers, but followers are always attracted to leaders, right? So
Yeah.
it's like if you, but it's like, but for me, it's like, okay, if people are following me, how could I initiate the leader in every follower,
Because I was going to ask you
right?
that. Do you
So
think
because
that everybody can be a leader?
absolutely,
Mm.
I think in every follower is a leader. You
Mm.
know, we're all
Mm.
followers,
Mm.
right? But there's the
Mm.
seeds for leadership. So it's like, how do you begin to germinate that seed? What's the environment that you need to be in? Who do you need to be surrounded by?
Mm.
What are the thoughts you should be thinking if you
Mm.
desire to be a leader and a high impact
Mm.
leader as well?
Mm. I love that because I'm a firm believer that everybody has leadership in them. Whether it's, you leading yourself or you're leading others, there's always going to be people, whether it's younger people who are looking up to you or people who are more junior to you in your career or whatever it is, there's always going to be people who are looking to you for some leadership. So I'm a massive believer
Mhm.
in that everybody has leadership within them. And you're right, it's just about creating that right environment for those things to grow.
Mhm.
So what would you say creates a good environment for leadership to grow?
What you feed your mind, so the books you read,
Mm.
the things you listen to, um, the things you watch, the things you hear, the environment you place yourself into, the people you surround yourself by, those all influence the person that you become. Growing up, my family used to say, be mindful of the company that you keep because you become
Mm.
the people you associate yourself around,
Mm.
right? So I'm just always cognizant of who am I surrounding myself by and how are they edifying me and how am I edifying them? How are we
Mm.
growing as a result of this interaction? How are we learning? How are we
Mm.
challenging one another? And and then what are the growth points, right?
Mm. Mm.
If we've been interacting for a year and we're
Mm.
still in the same spot,
Mm.
something is wrong with
That's not
this
good.
picture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
but but so often we do that, right? So often we
Mm.
continue to surround ourselves by people who will not, move us forward,
Mm.
but will continue to keep us keep us in one spot. So I think finding ways to continue to develop your mind, develop your perspective,
Mm,
having different experiences.
mm,
For me, international travel has been a huge channel for growing as a leader, because once you get a glimpse of who you can become, it's hard to go back to who you were.
mm,
It's hard to go back to a former self that no longer exists because you just got a picture that there's more to you than who you thought you were.
mm.
And it's powerful, but it's also scary
Yeah,
because
exactly.
the path behind you is no longer exists. So you have to move forward.
You have to
And
move
moving
forward.
forward
Yeah.
is, yeah, and it's gonna come with its challenges,
Hmm.
right? You're gonna have you're gonna have your bumps in the road, but who you become in the process,
Mm,
as I mentioned earlier, is far bigger than the destination.
mm,
Because it's the process that builds character. It's the
mm,
process that shapes values.
mm.
It's the process that shapes perspective. And it's the process that also helps with the evolution of your self-concept.
So true.
And that
It's so
cannot
true.
happen in your comfort zone, you know?
I genuinely believe that humans are made to be adventurous. And that's why I feel like it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Because you get to your
Hmm.
destination and life doesn't stop. You go to your next destination, you're moving towards the next thing. And that's why I think the process is so important, because I don't believe there's necessarily one destination that we're meant to get to. I believe that life is meant to be an adventure of lots of different destinations, different experiences, different things. And as you grow through those journeys, you become the person who you need to be for life.
And at every, there's a book called Mountain Beyond Mountains. I forgot the author's name, but it's like at every mountain you get to, like peak, there's another mountain. There's another mountain. So it's like
Yeah,
so it's at
yeah.
every level, it's like you're constantly required to grow, you know?
Mm, mm. And I think that's how humans are made. That's what we're made for, is that continuous improvement, continuously growing. It's that concept of, if something's not growing, it's kind of dying. There's no real kind of in between. It's kind of, you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. So I really like that concept of,
Hmm.
mountains after mountains after mountains. I think that's amazing.
Hmm. Yeah.
So with Leaders of the Free World, how does that work? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we're an international experience and leadership development program for young Black men. And we work primarily with community college and 4-year students. And the goal of it is to really introduce more young Black men to the opportunity of international experience.
Mm,
But we do it through the lens of leadership development. So we're an 8-month virtual leadership development program. We've
okay.
been virtual before the pandemic.
Mm,
So it put us ahead of the curve since students are coming from different institutions. But within the virtual sessions, we're looking at leadership. We're looking at kind of identity. We're bringing speakers in that, explore entrepreneurial leadership, social leadership, educational
mm,
leadership, but
mm,
looking at leadership from different lens, looking at leadership within kind of the West African context of
mm,
traditional leadership model and how it
mm,
varies from Western perspective on leadership.
mm.
So when we get to Ghana now, we are exploring those themes. We're meeting with leaders from different industries. We're meeting with parliamentarians. We're meeting with entrepreneurs. We're meeting with
Wow.
educators, and helping our students to understand that leadership is one a spectrum, but leadership is also about authenticity,
Mm,
right? And bringing who you are as a leader. Because at times when we
mm,
speak about leadership, it's like we have to be something other than ourselves to lead,
mm, mm,
right? But if you're leading from who you are, your values, your core belief system, if you're leading from that place, you're even more powerful because you
mm.
get to be yourself in a room where everyone feels like they need to be someone else. So I like to say, as to our students, like as leaders, how are you the thermostat in the room and not the
Mm.
thermometer,
Yeah,
right?
love that.
How are you changing the temperature
Changing the
in the
temperature. Yeah,
spaces that
come
you're
on.
a part of, rather
Mm,
than just adapting to the spaces that you're a part of? So
mm,
the program is really helping our students to understand that, one, what's the narrative that they've painted or their environments have created for themselves that may not live up to who they fully are as leaders. and getting them to realign with a new narrative that allows them to show up more boldly, to have more confidence, but to also create impact in the process. So that way they can continue to light that candle for other young leaders on their campuses. So once they come back, one, they're graduating, right? I think that's important. They're getting jobs, but they're also creating jobs. They're creating organizations. They're creating businesses. They're giving back in meaningful ways. So that's like one tier of the program that we've done. So we've been running that trip since 2016. So last year we had our fourth cohort that we took to Ghana. But then during the pandemic, of course, travel halted, right? No one could travel. The world was scary. So we wanted to find a way to examine what's the percentage of Black men in global leadership, right? And when we looked at the data, it was less than 2%.
Wow.
So not only are we underrepresented in international experience, but we're also underrepresented when it comes to leadership, right? So we're like, this is a huge problem. What are we going to do to fix it? So we decided during the pandemic to develop our Global Leadership Pipeline Initiative, where we partner with universities and organizations to facilitate conversations around how do we begin to diversify the global leadership pipeline. So in 2021, we had our first, was it 2021? No, last year. We had our first Global Leadership Summit where we worked, I think we had over 40 colleges and universities across the country participate with their Black male students. And we had the Peace Corps there, we had the Foreign Service there, we had Fulbright there, we had a number of organizations and college partners there talking about why international experience is important. What are the different opportunities available? How do you begin to access those opportunities on your campus? Where can you go, after having an international experience? What are the internship opportunities? So really, beginning to develop a pipeline of introducing students early on to these opportunities, not just like me, my last semester in college, but now you can learn about it as a freshman. Now you can learn about it potentially as a high school student. That way you can already begin thinking about the type of international exposure you would like to have. So that way you're ahead of the curve and you can be more intentional about the process. So that's what LFW is about.
That's amazing. What are some of the kind of the testimonials that you've seen, if there was one that you could pick that stands out to you in terms of the impact that it's had on someone? Is there one that you could share?
Yeah. So I remember one of our students from Chicago, we were in Egypt in 2018, and we just had a layover in Egypt. We weren't even supposed to go to Egypt, but with the flight stuff, we ended up having a layover there. And I remember we were standing in front of the pyramids, and you see the camels passing, and our students taking pictures. And I saw him just staring out into space. And he's from West, it's the South Side of Chicago. And I'm like, how do you feel? And he's like, man, like coming from where I come from, like I never thought I'd ever be here. And
wow, that's amazing.
and it to this day that gives me goosebumps because it was like that's what it's about. It's about shocking the mind and what you think is possible, right? And he's looking out into history right now, standing in front of the pyramids in Cairo, looking at the Sphinx. And for me, that was my alchemist experience. Because when I read about in the story of Santiago, the shepherd boy, wanted to go to Egypt, I'm like, I want to go to Egypt. And now here I am in Egypt, and one of my best friends from high school was with me, with our group from my community in Brooklyn and Brownsville. And it was just like so powerful that you can have a vision that could change the lives of other people in the process, And so for me, that testimony was everything that I needed to know to just keep going, keep pushing. All of the setbacks I've had was worth it. All of the failures, the schools rejected me at the time it did, and all like it was all lining my path up for this very moment. To help reach others who came from environments like I came from, shift the
Mm.
narrative that, you know what, I can come from this community, I can have this background, but I can still end up at this mountaintop experience with people who may not have had that same hurdles that I had to go through.
Mm. Mm. I was just thinking about what you said
Yeah.
about, the challenges that you had to overcome. What advice would you give to someone who is leading through a lot of challenges?
Your team is everything. You're
Mm.
as good as your team.
Mm.
It's not about doing it by yourself. I have a great team. I have a great board. I have a great support system. I have a great network. And you you have to be in the business of building people
Mm.
as a leader,
Mm.
because it's the team that you create around yourself that will drive you to conquer great feats.
Mm.
But if you think that you can do it by yourself,
Mm.
you got a lot got a lot of hardship awaiting you and frustration,
Yeah.
because I've heard people say, leadership can be lonely.
Mm.
It can be, but it doesn't have to be,
It's true.
if you build the right
Wow.
team around you. So yeah.
It's true, because when I think about leadership can be lonely, I think about the fact that sometimes you can't share everything with your team. Sometimes, there are things that only you can see as the leader that your team can't or shouldn't see. But even when I think about that, I think there are definitely ways that you can still, navigate that kind of thing without being lonely, without feeling like you can't talk to anybody. And that's where, whether it's the team who you lead or having a team of peers around you who you can talk to. So I remember when I became a head of department, I would talk to my old head of department, and he's like, now I could talk to you like a head of department, so we could talk peer to peer, and the problems that I'm having, he's already been through, so even if it's
Yeah.
about having a team of people alongside you, not just working for you, I think that makes a massive difference in terms of that journey as a leader, because I can understand when they say it's lonely, but you're right, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and I think particularly in corporate culture,
Mm.
that's how it's set up.
Mm.
But if you start your own organization, you can define whatever culture you want, right?
True.
And you can create whatever team you want, and you can create the psychological safety needed
Mm. Mm.
for people to feel comfortable to share, hey, I made a mistake, boss. I don't know how we're going to navigate this. Or rather than feeling like, man, I can't make mistakes here and I can't grow here, or I don't feel like I can be myself here, right? So as leaders, and of course, this can be challenging within in a traditional structure where it was not created by you and there's already an existing culture that there's norms shaping people behavior.
Mm.
So in that environment, I think identifying the mentors, identifying
Mm.
folks, the predecessors, or people external to your organization that you can have those conversations with.
Mm.
But if you're creating your own organization or you're on the entrepreneurial track, I think it's, finding a community of entrepreneurs that you can share practices with,
Mm.
you can confide in,
Mm.
you can share your mess ups, you can learn from others. But it's going to be
Mm.
important to just have a space where you can bring those burdens, those entrepreneurial challenges to,
Mm.
and not feel judged,
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So just as we close, I'd love to understand a bit more about how you mentioned about like spirituality and faith. I'd love to understand how that impacts your leadership.
Yeah. I think one, it guides my values,
Mm.
in terms of how I lead.
Mm.
I like, I like to I see myself as a servant leader,
Mm.
um, in my approach to leadership, and just realizing that my purpose is to help bring light to darkness,
Mm.
help help other people understand their worth, their value, their purpose.
Mm.
So in any capacity that I'm in any space that I'm in any role that I'm in, that essentially is what I'm trying to do.
Mm.
Reach people beyond, you know, beyond the surface. So if I'm at work or,
Mm.
you know, I'm interacting with folks, I'm like, this there's so much more to you and your life than this,
Mm.
and I think so often we operate on the physical plane that we forget that this is a spiritual life that we're in, and
Mm.
you have to be able to see, even though you're physically here, you're a spirit being, and being able to understand the assignment that God has given you in the time that He's given you, and
Mm.
and having that impact. So for me, it allows me to show up. It allows me to connect
Mm.
deeper with other people. It allows me to engage. It gives me discernment to make decisions. Um, it it allows me to navigate the challenges that I face, realizing that I'm not alone in the journey.
Mm.
Um, it it gives me, it's my compass. It's my source. It fuels me. It wakes me up. It reminds me of who's in control. You
Mm.
know, and yeah, would can't live without it. Wouldn't want to lead without it.
Mm.
So yeah, it's the source for me.
Mm. Amazing. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Lavar, for your time, for your thoughts. It's been a really, really good episode. Really enjoyed hearing about your journey and how you've grown and how you've navigated it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and keep going. What you're doing. I've been seeing the journey so far since connecting with you, and just extremely proud to know you. Proud of the growth you're experiencing, and look forward to seeing how you continue to reach other people globally through this podcast and platform. So thank you for having me.
That's so kind. Thank you so, so much. That really means a lot to me. So thank you. And thank you guys
Absolutely.
so much for listening. And we will see you soon.
Absolutely.
All right.
See you.
How did you find
Thank you for watching this episode of the Dunamis EQ Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, flick through our channel and there's loads more that you can watch. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that you can hear first when new episodes drop. We'll catch you on the next episode.